Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of Adventures in Job Searching. My name is Drew Styling, and happy to keep the show going. And today we have Tay Bolling joining the show. Excuse me. And this is a case where probably a lot of my guests are going to be like this. Where it's kind of I came across their LinkedIn profile, thought their story was really interesting, and I really want to get a guest from a variety of backgrounds, industries, levels, job titles, everything. So. Uh, Rather than have me speak for someone, I will let her take it over. How are you today?
I'm good, Drew. How are you?
Thanks. So could you give the audience kind of a background about, both, maybe some education, career path, and then, what's led you to the lovely position of being in the job search today?
Of course. Well, for one, Drew, thanks for having me today. It's always really cool to have these conversations and connect with people. And that's the beauty of the internet. Really kind of starting about me. So, my background, I'm originally from the New Orleans area. So, I went to school there. I'm an SEC grad. So, go Tigers in case anyone's out there watching. But really, I'm an operations
Are,
leader.
are you, are you excited with, Lee?
I am. Yes. It's been a good season, but I mean, I'm going to keep my football thoughts get a bit intense. So,
It's like that every LSD fan I've met has the same way, so I understand that.
yeah. So a bit about me. Well, like I said, I'm from the New Orleans area, went to school there. And I'm an operations leader with the background in the financial sector, and executive facing environments. Early on in my career, I moved to New York to be more closer to complex financial and operational
Mhm,
settings. I started out at a CPA firm where I built a really
mhm,
strong foundation, dealing with compliance, detail, rigor. And then from there, I moved into the investor relations, corporate access, and equity sales space at Rothschild and Co. Working in a really highly regulated environment where, things like discretion, precision, external credibility, these are all, non-negotiables. And
right.
then most
And that was that.
oh, I'm
And
sorry.
sorry to interrupt. That was the kind of job you kind of scrolled in 9:30, 10:30, and we're gone by 2 p.m., right?
Yes. Well, yeah, I
Not
melike,
quite.
yeah.
I'm teasing you. I know from other people that have worked at Rothschild the stories I've heard.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know if 2:30, I'm trying to think, have I ever left the office at 2:30 in the afternoon?
Maybe 2:30 in the morning.
Yes, that's better. But, look, I mean, I was obviously blessed. I had a very great team. And so, we worked very hard and, we stayed on the ball, but there was a lot of support and a lot of, really having each other's backs. So thankfully, I was able to experience that. And I think when you're working in those really high pressure environments, it's really great to have an amazing team surrounding you that can support and kind of lift you up. So, you can get good work done, but not be, burnt out. So
And what is something, when you were doing that kind of work, I'm assuming mid to late 20s, 30s, was that something that you ever anticipated yourself doing in college, or was it kind of the goal throughout your time? Or wow, like I did not imagine taking, going from NOLA to NYC.
funny enough, I always wanted to live in New York City, but I
Yep.
guess the funny part of that is that I originally wanted to be a writer. So, um, but I always knew I wanted to be a businesswoman or work in business. But I was really passionate about writing, and so my dream was to move to New York. That's where I always wanted to live at my entire life, and so I didn't really anticipate the financial services career. My mom is a CPA, so she got her, I like to call it her dose of child labor. This is before child labor laws were really good. So I got really good, in the financial space and so forth. My career went from there. So that's sort of how I ended up originally, choosing that as a career.
And so in particular, what most interested me about your profile is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I'd imagine is the type of organization that's extremely influential, and no one probably really knows about it unless you're in that DC world. So, could you talk a little bit about how you moved from the for-profit sector to, an association like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and then also what career, how day-to-day career life is different between New York City and DC, and how the cities are wired differently in terms of career advancement, that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. So, I was on sabbatical. I left my job in finance. I was offered a role at the U.S. Chamber, and to me, I always held the chamber in such a very high regard because I come from a family of small business owners. So that's small businesses in my blood, and the work and the mission that they've always had, always keeping in mind small businesses, business owners, big, large, small. That really was something that I was passionate about, and I was like, "Wow, I want to be a part of this." And I had the pleasure of going there. I served in an operations and chief of staff role, working with the head of policy and working very closely with other senior leadership, and a very high visibility member-driven org is what I would, describe the chamber as. And in terms of the work lifestyle or the work life balance between DC and New York, I think one thing that DC does pretty well is that it fosters this very, I don't want to say, so say family oriented, but I think it fosters more of a slower environment. Like you work in, when you're working in the political sector or a political adjacent, you're obviously in, very high pressure situations, environments, dealing with government officials, dealing with, all sorts of, people from different backgrounds. But they still are able to really kind of take into consideration, the idea of like, there's work life balance just really exists here. Whereas I feel like people in New York City, and not that this is a bad thing, I think that there is just a different mindset of like what their definition of work-life balance is. It's a grind city, and I respect it. I respect the grind. That's what drew me to the city in the first place. So I think that's the vast difference. I think just one city is just completely 100% on grind mode. It's like you work really hard and then you enjoy the fruits of your labor, right? And DC also does that, but I think they just have different definitions of work-life balance.
Do you find yourself preferring one of the cities more, feeling like it's a better fit for you?
I mean, I think I've taken pieces from each city at this point. I mean, there were things obviously about New York that I admired and I thought, it was amazing. And there are things about DC. I mean, a bit informally, but I never cooked when I lived in New York City. I moved to DC and suddenly I had more time to learn how to cook. Right? Like nothing to really do with my work per se, but it was just some of those things, that skills and things and hobbies that I was able to, have time to pick up, and it's been a great journey so far.
Okay. Was it a particular challenge to get into the chamber, given you that you'd wanted to work there for so long? How do you think either your background or your network was able to help you, get that? Because I think a lot of our listeners have, I really want to work for that organization, really want to work for that company. And there, sometimes it's as simple as applying, sometimes it's the network, sometimes it's the company reaches out to you. So how were you, given that you'd wanted to work there for a while, how were you able to make that a reality?
For my personal, I guess, opinion or narrative, and this is obviously not speaking for the chamber and how they do their hiring. Um, I think that that org does a really great job at sourcing talent. I think they have really great people that know what they're looking for. And I say to people that want to get to orgs like that is making sure that when you're presenting yourself online and you're presenting who you are, and I always tell junior people this too when they want to apply for roles, that when someone looks at your online profile, that is your first step to your sales pitch right there,
Mm.
right? And so how you're, putting your resume, how you're presenting yourself online, your online presence, because that is just what it is now in modern day. People are not walking into offices anymore and handing your resume to people, right? That's their first
Right.
interaction with you. And so if you want to work at these places, really make sure that you're taking the time to craft that online presence. And I know it sounds like you'd be like, well, I mean, people do that, right? And I also think too, network plays a part in that. I think strategically mapping out, where you're accepting roles and where, really investing in your long-term goals. Obviously, this is not me saying, be overtly, selective when you're, taking roles, but I mean, when you look at someone's background, you see that they worked at places like Rothschild and Co., or they've worked, on Capitol Hill or for this member or whatever the case may be. There's credibility behind that, right? And people can see that, oh, that's great talent. I want to scoop that up. So I just think if you want to be in those roles and you want to get into those doors, focus on your online presence, really craft yourself very well. This is a sales pitch. You're selling yourself, selling your product, which is you. And, you got to work at it and, perfect it. And it takes time, So, I mean, things like that. It's a process.
What, and when you say it's a process, where do you think a lot of people might get hung up on that? What's the part of that process that you think a lot of people struggle with? And, again, because again, this podcast, I want to all be a mix of, some advice and also personal narratives. So based
Yeah.
on, how you were able to be successful, what do you, if others have asked you for advice about how to get something, what's something you see that a lot of people struggle with in that process to get to where they really want to get?
I think, and what I've seen this, and it's funny you asked me this question because I have had this conversation with, interns, junior people. And I think where people always get hung up at is their confidence and trusting themselves. And what I mean by that is that in order to be and operate efficiently in these spaces, you have to trust your judgment a great deal. Your judgment is your biggest tool in your toolbox, right? And when you're dealing with and you're trying to be seen and noticed by executive leadership, or you're trying to get promoted, or you're trying to really trust your judgment and really position yourself correctly. What I mean by that is that, I always tell people no one's ever going to be mad at you for offering yourself up to help out wherever it may be, right? The littlest task, the biggest task, the medium-sized task. And I think a lot of people get hung up on like their confidence and trusting themselves. Well, they get afraid, or can I, approach this person? Can I offer my help to them? Will they get upset if I offer my help to them? And it's this, this nervousness that, you're going to be told no, or you're going to be shut down, or this little task right here doesn't mean anything. So why would I do it? And the reality is that no one's ever going to be mad at you for asking. And if that is the case, then well, that's just a whole nother conversation about, leadership at that point. But no one's gonna be mad at you for asking. No one's going to, be mad at you for being able to trust your judgment. That is a great quality that you
Mm.
want in any employee or anybody, whether they be junior, whether they be senior. You want people that trust their judgment. They make a decision, they stick to it because they know the calculated risk, they know what they're doing. That's what you want. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up.
Mhm. And, so, and that's really wonderful advice. And again, like I said, that's a big something I really want done, in this podcast. I certainly want it to be the voice of the job seeker in America, but I also want it to be the voice that has some wisdom to share. So thank you so much.
Of
So,
course.
you get into this very highly regarded organization, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You're in a very, I think is there roughly 700 employees or so there? Roughly?
About
Yeah.
500-ish,
Okay.
or yeah.
Right. So, and you're in a very prominent role there. And truthful, that is what intrigued me most about, your profile, that, the downside of being that high on the pyramid when you're job searching is it's a lot narrower at the top of the pyramid in terms of the number of openings, that I can imagine, you might be seeking. So that's, which goes to say, I was extraordinarily impressed by, your career path and especially the role you did at the chamber. So could you talk about, the highs and lows of your times there? Maybe what might, what went maybe better than expected there? What, maybe was frustrating about your time there? And again, we're not trying to throw anyone under the bus. I mean, it's more just like, your personal experience of working at that kind of organization, especially because it was one that, you'd targeted for a long time.
Yeah, and I'll speak very broadly and very general
Right, right,
based.
right, right.
I think that the one of the great things about that organization is that the talent is remarkable. I mean, you are working with and interacting with some of the brightest minds, and they're coming from different schools, different backgrounds, and it is a place of opportunity. And that, to me, the fact that I had the opportunity to work at a place like that and be a part of that was just it was remarkable. It was great. Like, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world, quite frankly. Um, and I think that in terms of like what one would consider difficulty, I think my difficulty was more of a personal thing. It was an adaptation thing coming from Wall Street. In the way that business is conducted, in the way that you approach things, there is a level of diplomacy that, DC requires. And not say that it isn't required,
Right.
on Wall Street at all or in the financial sector, at most banks or whatnot. But it's very different. And I think when I first got to DC and when I first, got into my role, I struggled a little bit with like the sort of the je ne sais quoi behind it. And I was like, okay, like, this is a time for me then as a professional who I would consider myself pretty much now, well into my career that, okay, this is a learning moment for me. This is where I can sit, I can observe around me and take some notes. um, and then, go from there. So I think in terms of like greatness and challenges, I think, that's how I would genuinely probably describe that experience. Yeah.
And what would you say, you learn the most about yourself as a person as a result of that experience working there?
Um, I'm sorry, are you asking what I learned about myself as a person from working there?
Yeah, but you
Oh,
might not have realized in terms of either what's important to you in your career
yeah.
or what skills you might, only discover during there. Wow, I'm really good at this.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to build really cool systems while I was there. And one thing that I learned about myself is that, I am so passionate about business development and I am so passionate about, seeing and helping a business really like grow, like whether that be in terms of like strategy, how can we generate revenue, how can we come up with new ways to utilize modern tools, AI, technology? How can we do these things? And I think working at the chamber, I had, the privilege to build these really cool systems and do these really cool things that, was like, wow. So now I'm at the point in my career where like this is what I know that I am 100% passionate about. And I'm also doing it within my, my consulting on the side. So yeah. So that's what it taught me about myself.
Great. Could you talk about how, especially for people who are between kind of full-time jobs, how, doing consulting on your own, what the pros and cons of that and what do you found interesting about it, kind of hanging up your own shingle versus being an employee?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of pros, I think as the generations get younger, I think flexibility is very important to them. And that is the hugest pro I think of doing consulting work is that you are incredibly flexible. If you know how to manage your time. Now, the only downside to that is that you have to be someone who knows how to prioritize and manage yourself. Right? It's really easy to manage other people or like get good at managing other people, but really being accountable for yourself and knowing how to manage yourself properly. That way you're providing your clients with, good work. You're practicing a very, trusting and honest relationship with them. That is something that is, it takes time to become good at. And so consulting is not for everyone. I've always been a huge advocate for that. I think that if you are someone who, it's just like entrepreneurship in general, right? If you go open a restaurant or you go open a CPA firm or you go open, a law practice, so I think in terms of pros, it's flexible, you have your creativity is not limited. Um, but the con to that is that you really have to be good at managing yourself and you have to, you know, be able to, get on the ball. And there are sometimes clients may have certain deadlines or things may not, when you have that sort of 9 to 5 where you can sort of hit the stop button and say, okay, well, technically I can hit the stop button here. And that's not really how it works in the consulting world unless, depending on what you have going on with your clients. And also, I think too, the people atmosphere, the people aspect of things. Usually when you're consulting, either if you don't have an office or you're not running a space, you don't have that office culture, that a lot of people love and a lot of people appreciate. I mean, I know I do. I've been fortunate to have some of the best colleagues, and I really enjoyed seeing their faces every day, contrary to popular belief from what you see on television or you see on TikTok or Instagram or whatnot. But I enjoyed seeing my colleagues. I enjoyed being around them, and it made my job just it made going to work great. So
Mhm. Do you find, this, and again, a big part of this podcast is kind of the bridge period. People that have had strong periods before and they're kind of in that bridge zone looking for what's the next big mountain they're going to climb. So would you say this current period, especially the aspect of, running your own consulting practice, has it been generally energizing or draining? Well, what do you feel like? What has the feeling been, especially compared to just having a more traditional job?
I think it's been really energizing. I think that I have a very creative mind, so I think really being able to exercise my creativity and how I interact with my clients and the work that I produce and put out for them and how I can make their visions come alive for them. I think that is incredibly energizing to me. And it's been a lovely experience, honestly. I think that, in my case, I kind of came with the plan on what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And I had built a network. So, you know, obviously my path to consultancy or entrepreneurship may look very different from other people. And so for me though, I think the maybe in the only way that I would somewhat find it draining is that when you work for someone, there's always that I can fall back, not fall backwards, but I have something behind me, right? And when it's just you're the
Right.
boss, like that's not the case, right? So that I guess maybe, yeah, could be a little draining at times. That afterthought that's always there is like I don't have anything behind me. It's just me. So yeah.
And how do you find, you've been able to deal with that, that you're getting, I know nothing really. Who's the one that carried the law on shoulders? Was that Sisyphus? I don't know. How do you feel like, you know, you're able to handle that one that is carrying that, you are the HR representative, you're the accountant, you're the custodian of your company, you're the CEO. How do you think, what do you think if people who are in the job search now are considering that, what advice would you have to managing oh, this is a lot on my plate right now.
I think you just have to one be very patient with yourself. I know especially because just the current climate of the world is kind of really overstimulating in a lot of ways. I think that running a business and, having, I mean, there's when you're running a business and whether you're consulting or whatever it may be, like you just said, there's so much to it. So I think if you're going to go that route, I think the best way is to sort of set yourself up for success by doing a lot of research, figuring out what it is that you really want to be doing and how you want to do it and then leaning on people, leaning on your network for support. you know it's never I don't believe in dumb questions, so I think that reaching out to people and being like, hey, how does this work, or sitting down with the CPA. You'd be surprised how many people have never sat down with a CPA in their life, right? Someone who you may not know what kind of write-offs you could use for your business, or you may not know how to handle this, or reaching out to career coaches in your network. I mean, there are so many avenues and opportunities, to just have a coffee with someone and get their, get pick their brain about what you may have questions about and what you're struggling with. And then maybe also vent too. And so I think, when you have those opportunities and when you're setting yourself up, granted, it won't always be perfect. But it starts by attempting at least to set yourself up for success and then utilizing your network and people that and other professionals, for avenues of advice. and also just to lean on in general.
What do you say to the people who either feel embarrassed or, they don't want to be seen as needy? And even though there's a network out there that wants to help them, that network probably doesn't know that they really could use help. What would you say to people who feel too embarrassed or ashamed to ask for help, especially in the job search?
So I'll tell you this. I had an aunt, who is now obviously deceased. She had bone cancer years ago. And I remember as a kid, I wanted a piece of candy. Do you remember those candies? They were called orange slices. I'm from the South, so maybe not, but they sell them in like the little like country like stores or whatever. She had a bag of them one time, and I wanted one so bad. And I remember being like, was looking at her, and I wouldn't really ask. I was like, maybe she's gonna tell me no. And I remember she looked at me and she said, "You know, there's only two things that can really happen. You ask me, I say yes. You ask me, I say no." Right? And I remember when she told me that as a child, so she's like, don't ever be afraid to ask for anything. I promise you, humility is a lost art, and it will do you wonders to not be afraid to ask for anything. And I remember when she did that, I mean, true story, I was probably like 9 years old when that happened. And throughout the remainder of my life, well into adulthood, I have never been afraid to, and I say to people that are afraid, that are struggling with that, or if it's a confidence, there is nothing embarrassing about being transitional. Life is meant to be transitional, right? I feel like I've lived multiple lives at this point, and, and the story is still being written, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the beauty of it. And to see yourself when you look back at and you look at how you've evolved as a career or as a professional or even interpersonally throughout your life, like it all leads all the roads lead to somewhere, right? So like you can't get so caught up in this, I'm afraid, I'm embarrassed, people will, think things. You really got to get out there and do what's best for you and keep yourself in mind, right? At some point, yes, it is important what people think to an extent in terms of like a reputation, but understand that like when you have to curate a life for yourself and you have to make something of yourself or keep building on that life, that's up to you, and there should be no shame and no embarrassment on how you map that out. I mean, it's linear, right? Like it's not a perfect road. And don't be ashamed, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it.
Really? Well, that life is transitional. One reason I like this heard before. I think for a lot of people that sounds scary, change is scary, transition is scary. So could you talk about, what drives your belief that life is transitional and how that affects how you're living your life on a daily basis now?
Because I believe life is so transitional, I really approach every day with taking it one day.
Why do you believe it?
Oh,
Why
why do
why
I
do you
believe
believe
it's
that?
transitional? Well, I believe it's transitional
Mhm.
because, that's a part of human evolution. Like, right? Like, we evolve over time in our stories and things, our lives, our stories, our physical appearances, all of the above. It evolves over time. And that's just the nature of the beast. And so, I've never, I believe it's transitional because of that. No one, I mean, very rarely are people's stories just kind of on this like straight path and it never once goes here, there, maybe here, there, right? So, I mean, I've never really seen it any other way, which is why I think that, people shouldn't be, or at least they shouldn't feel like they have to be on this straight, narrow, perfect path 100% of the time. It's just, to me, that's just not realistic.
And so what do you say to people that almost they might see a job they're really excited about, they almost feel like they don't have the right background and embarrassed to apply given, I probably don't have the perfect background. How do you encourage people to find that confidence there? And I guess too, has that ever been an issue for you, especially earlier in your career? Were there times that you almost felt like they're not gonna want me? I don't even want
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, really early on, I mean, I like when I was making the transition from being working at a CPA firm to working at one of the most prestigious investment banks, like I was like really kind of scared. I was like, wow, like this is like a whole nother ball game for me. And I was like really, 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 just kind of like I felt like a really little bitty fish in a really, really, really big pond. And I remember sitting down with myself after work. And it's funny because when I first got there, I would stay at the office till like, yeah, I don't know what time it was. It was late though. And this, the one of the CEO, actually one of the partners, would see me every single night. And one day he said to me, come in at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And I was like, and I kinda was like, okay." And he was like, "You've stayed here every single night to this exact time. It's okay." And so after that, I started sitting with myself after work, after that interaction that time, and I was like, "Okay, like, there's nothing that I really need to be afraid of." Like, when you really break it down, like, when you're applying for these jobs, mind you, interviews go 2 ways. So, like, they're interviewing you and you're also interviewing them because you matter just as much as the employee, as someone who's going to give a company or a business or a firm your expertise and your skills, no matter how junior they may be, right? Because there's a place for everyone inside of a business org. So early on, I didn't really quite understand that at first, and then over time, as my career developed, I was like, "Oh yeah, like I mean, I can apply for that job. The worst they'll do is tell me no, and if they tell me no, that's okay. That's just redirection for me and for what is meant for me out there, right?" And so I think that, you can't get so caught up on paper. There are a lot of people that I have interviewed that were perfect on paper, and then when it came down to it, it wasn't a fit, right? So you can't focus so much on that description and what that paper says, right? I mean, you'd be surprised. Some people, you look at what's on the paper and you're like, okay. You see them, you meet, you interact with them, and you're like, oh wow, this was totally different. Even if they may not have the exact skills, they have these other skills that can 100% be applied in different ways that, we can shape, we can mold this, we can work with this. Like, and so you never wanna lose out on good talent by focusing really too hard on black and white, on the paper, the print. So, yeah.
And what do you think was driving you to stay so late in the office? Like, do you feel like I need to prove myself? Do you think was something like that inside of you at the time?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was like, I mean, my colleagues were so polished, and I mean, I'm so in awe of them. Like, I mean, I truly, like, was, and I was like, "Whoa." Like, I gotta stay here, and I gotta, like, put my head down, and I gotta, like, grind it out because I gotta show them that, like, I want to be here so bad. And I didn't do it to get like necessarily noticed per se. Like I was just kind of like, I need to show that I'm a part of this team, and like if they need me here, I can do this. And um that's when the CEO was like, okay, well, like, you stayed here like every single day, like, go home. Like, and so, but it was one of those moments where, senior leadership saw me, they saw me, and, and they acknowledged it. And it's something that I'll never forget. It's probably one of my like top 5 memories in my entire professional career. So,
If you could go back to that person showing up on the first day, might you give her some advice that you know now that you maybe didn't know then?
yeah, I mean, when you show up on the first day, even if that means you have to just sit outside the door for a few minutes and just kind of like take a deep breath and collect yourself, I always tell people I believe in energy. I'm from New Orleans, so I believe in energy. And I always tell people that, when you come in with this very nervous, this very sort of like shaky energy, it's transferable. People can see it, they can feel it. And so even if you're nervous, even if you're scared, it's okay. You just have to take a moment, collect yourself, because you're obviously there for a reason. Imposter syndrome, I get it. It happens to all of us. But you're there for a reason. They put
Never happened to me. Never happened to me.
well, true. I don't know. But, they picked you for a
I'm
reason.
special. I'm very special.
Hey, I mean, that's okay.
Yes, they did. And I think that's something, right.
They picked you for a reason. And so when you show up on your first day, you show up as your best self. You show up, you basically reiterate the fact of, yeah, this is why you guys chose me to do this role, because I know myself. I'm proud of myself. I know the work that I do. I know what I can bring. I know my add value. And you're going to get a return investment on this, So don't worry, And so that's what I tell people: show up as your best self, show up strong, confident, be able to be taught and be able to, listen, obviously, but, confidence is good. Confidence is respected.
I would be remiss if I didn't wish you a happy belated birthday. First off, how was it? And it got the nice dinner or anything last night?
I did. Yeah, it was a great birthday. I mean, it's another reflective
Mm.
year for me. It's been almost 3 years now I've been in DC, so that was interesting to sort of reflect on. And yeah, I mean, look, I couldn't be more grateful. Another year around the sun. So
And I know something you had shared on LinkedIn yesterday. And again, that's why I kind of asked you, would you go back and tell that woman on her first day there, in college, you said, of course, growth is rarely early linear, but also, if I could speak to an earlier version of myself and emphasize that uncertainty is not weakness, it's a sign of growth. Um, and then you talk about confidence as well just now. I love it. I'm clear about my strengths, intentional about where I invest my energy, confident in my capacity to lead through change. I'm looking ahead with purpose. So, uh, number one, you need to be my full-time motivational life coach. I love that. Uh, number two, though, that all sounds wonderful, but also for anyone, unless you are superhuman, there is absolutely a level of fear when you're looking for that next big role. So I guess the first thing, what sort of roles are you targeting at this point? You had a wonderful run at the Chamber of Commerce. What are you really hoping to get into at this next phase in your career?
so, I think at this stage I'm really focused on alignment, right? So like roles roles where operational leadership is trusted and the experience is valued. So, fit, scope,
Yeah.
culture, judgment matter a lot more to me at this point in my career than speed. And I think for me, it's
Mhm.
just about being selective in a way. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. I think, it's gotta be a right fit, and that trust, and that there has to be an org that's willing to invest, in their people, and, have that level of trust, and, and be, aligned. And obviously you won't be aligned 24/7. That's just reality, right? But like that's where I'm looking, now. And I've had that, and I've been fortunate to have that in the past. So I know it's out there,
Yeah.
right? So
How do when you're interviewing for a company, how do you get those spidey senses up? Because I'm sure that every company loves to sell that they're the greatest company ever. So as you're in this current phase of the job search, what are either some green flags or red flags for you that this is the right fit and this align, you talk about alignment, this aligns with my values.
So I think in terms of like when you're in the interviewing stage, I think usually a green flag to me is like whether it's the recruiter, the hiring manager themselves, whomever, they're respecting your time for one. So they're not following up with you at all hours of the night. Like one thing, oddly enough, that I would never do when I would like hire people and like interview people is I would never send people like correspondence back at like 7 o'clock at night. Cause like 9 times that it doesn't really match up. You give them like I want to email them around 9 or 10 a.m. or I try to get those emails out between 9 before noon. So that way applicants have time to respond to my emails during the daytime, or, sort of make sure I'm giving them that opportunity and that chance, and being respective of their, respecting their time. So I think when you're in the
Sure.
interviewing stage, a company that is respecting your time and respecting you as a professional and your skills, that's really important. flake, being on hopping on a interview 30 minutes late and without, any, notice, or saying, oh, I had a call run over 15 minutes. And it's kind of like, okay, well, that's fine. It happens. That's the reality of corporate America, or, non-corporate America, nonprofit world, whatever, wherever you are. But, just be as an applicant or as someone interviewing, that would kind of, to me, be like, okay, time management may be an issue, you know? So when you're in the interviewing stage, those are things that I just like really like to look out for. When you have passed the interview stage and you're well into the interview stage and you're meeting the team in person, I personally think when a business or a firm has you interview with people that you will actually be interfacing with and working with on a daily basis, that to me is super important. And I think
Mhm.
that shows a business or firm that is very serious about the talent they're trying to retain, and they are really looking for a good fit. Like, I've never understood when people interview at places, or a company will interview someone and they'll have them meet the HR person and like as another, miscellaneous, employee. And it's like, okay, well, who are they really going to be interfacing with on a daily basis outside of this executive or outside of this partner? Who are they really going to be working with? Right? Like, we don't want people on like 20-person panel interviews, but also you want them meeting the people that they're really going to be spending time with. That's how you really detect if it's a culture fit or not. And that matters just as much as skill, or, knowledge, or, being an expert, at, whatever field you're in, I mean, it matters. So I think those are things like that you really need to that applicants should pay attention to. It tells me about how serious, like I said, that they're willing to, be, and that they're really looking for real, incredible talent that they're willing to trust and work with in the long run.
Speaking about, times you see some sort of routine processes that just kind of boggle the mind. Has there ever been a time when unfortunately you were caught up in one of them and you almost just felt, maybe you felt like disrespected or frustrated or something, any experiences that, again, we're not trying to name names here, but
Yeah.
anything that triggered is like, yeah, like I was not treated how I deserve to be treated then. Because I
Yeah.
think that's something I hear from so many job searchers. The companies are not treating me respectfully. They're not treating me like a human in this job search process.
It's funny, when I first moved to New York, you're interviewing in all these different places because want a job, right? And I'm interviewing at all these different places. And I remember I probably had interviewed with like 20 different firms. And I remember, and this is before I like started working with recruiters. So I was just like applying, getting the interview. And for the life of me, like, either or the whoever was hiring, the HR, whatever it was, would be 30 minutes late to our interview, or they'd ask me to do this, like, assignment ahead of time, and like all these like kind of jumping through hoops things. And so that's when I really learned as a professional, like, if you obviously, like, there are times when to respectfully push back on things. And as a professional, I'm
How,
not.
how do you how do you know how do you know when those times are?
So, for example, like, if you're asking a potential applicant to submit, or, mock up this entire, like, project or scenario based assignment, it's like, okay, well, how much time is this applicant going to have to dedicate to this? And this doesn't even guarantee that they get this role. Like, I just think you have to be very, especially if you're not hiring for an extremely senior level role, I don't really believe in asking people to do things like that. And I think that's a time where you as a
Mhm,
professional
mhm,
can respectfully kind of push back a little bit, and, kind of ask them to clarify and sort of like make clear the expectation and why this is being asked, right? And so that way you're not investing all this like kind of unnecessary time. I'm not saying like, if you're applying for an engineering job and like they ask you to like do some sort of like engineering test, like obviously that makes sense, right? But like, some obviously professions will require things like that. But I just tell people to just keep in mind, like, you know, just keep in mind when you're interviewing, just remember that as much as you want a job and as much as, we obviously in this world, we all need to work, you still matter as a professional. And, you being comfortable and your respect should still stand and companies should still respect you and prioritize you just as much as their own wants, needs, and benefits.
Mhm. I mean, you kind of mentioned some disrespectful behavior just I mean, if you're, assuming, sure, they're, given the different places you've been and the, tough to get into places you've interviewed at, sure, I can imagine you felt, that companies didn't treat you with the respect that you deserve at times in the recruiting process. Is that fair?
Yeah. 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 I mean, just, keep in mind that, you're obviously important too. They're hiring for a reason, right? They're looking for someone. And so you want to work with them and they should want to work with you just as much.
So when there were those times that, you felt, or you not even felt, you knew that they were not treating you with the respect that one human should treat you another, how were you able to not let that paralyze you and not let that make you cynical, but instead, or first off, I mean, yeah, how did you deal with that pain of not being treated well? I guess that's the first question.
I think it's one of those kind of life lessons as you get older and as you become more of a professional, you have to not internalize things and take it personal, right? And while also still
Then
making
how do you do that? How do you not internalize
So
things? How
I
do you
think
not
you
take
don't
things personally?
internalize it by like breaking it down in real time. Like, okay, you may not agree with this, and they may be asking you to do something that you may not like, or you may not agree with, or you may not feel is very useful of your time. And that's not a reflection of you as a professional. This is just what they're asking
Mm,
for. And you have autonomy to decide yes or no, right? So that is how you don't internalize things. Remember that you have autonomy.
mhm.
And so
And
in
and
those Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no. So following up on that, then, were there times throughout your career that you kind of maybe either through family, through yourself, through college, you felt pressured that I should be going down this career path, but you just knew it wasn't the right fit. Like, have there been times you kind of had an internal battle of, what you're supposed to do with your career versus what you chose to? And I mean, again, you mentioned, wanting to be a writer originally and not knowing finance, and then the DC nonprofit world. So, could you talk about any sort of internal battles you've had as you've explored your career?
I don't know if I would
Between
necessarily.
what you think you're supposed to do and what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily think I would call them internal battles that I've experienced. I think
Mm,
there have been times where I've like, what if? What if I had chose this instead? Or what if I had chose to try to be a writer, go to school for, comms or, what if? And there are times where I definitely have those thoughts. I'm sure many people do. And I guess why that hasn't really like had any implication on like what I'm still choosing to do in the space that I'm still choosing to work within is because I have taken, for me personally, my love for writing. I thought about it like this probably like a year or two ago, and I was like, okay, wow, like I did want to be a writer. That was what I wanted to do, but also I really enjoy writing. So like, why can't this be a hobby for me? You know? Like, I chose
yeah.
a career in the financial sector, and I'm happy with that. I love the world of business. I love, the economy, the market. Like, I love it all, and business development. But I also love to write, and now writing is a hobby for me. So I think
Mm,
those are, I guess, the to the max of my, I would what you would consider internal battles. I think it's just sort of, it's like a what if, or what if I had done this, or what if I had moved to New York earlier, or if I had tried to do internships, at Vogue or Condé Nast or whatever, what would that have looked like for me? But, you know,
what it looks like is the greatest film of all time, The Devil Wears Prada.
yes,
Uh,
I was hoping you knew where I was going with that.
one thing you talked about in, that LinkedIn post that I mentioned earlier, and by the way, the birthday card's in the mail. One thing that you had mentioned about that is, moving to different cities or and whatnot. I think one thing that doesn't get talked about enough in America is, the vast regional differences. Do you talk about what it's like, being a child of New Orleans, and then all of a sudden you're, riding the one train with some very,
Interesting,
some
folks.
guys doing backflips in front of you, and all that. So, and by the way, I auditioned to do Showtime, and they did not take me. But could you talk about what it's like to come from New Orleans, and what was the culture shock there?
Well, for one, New Orleans is a beautiful city where people are so, it's just really a huge community, right? And, you know, I was fortunate that I actually ended up going to high school in Chicago, in the Chicago area. So I kind of got that
I,
mix.
I, I, and for what part? I have to ask information.
Oh, I went to ETHS. Go kids.
Oh, okay, my sister went to Northwestern, and for
Okay.
those who don't know, and again, you're using acronyms as if people know what you're talking about. Evanston Township High School, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. ETHS. Yeah.
So the high school she went to is probably the most like equally diverse high school in America. It's right where Northwestern University is, on the North Shore of Chicago. So okay, that does add some interesting context. That you moved from New Orleans to kind of mini New York City in the Chicago area. So
Yeah.
I guess that
So
certainly might have helped make that transition earlier
it did
a
because it
little
sort
easier,
of
rather.
brought me into this really city-like atmosphere, and I had been going to Chicago my entire life. My mom had brought me there, every summer. I learned how to, ice skate. I knew a lot of the kids. Like when I got to high school, I knew a lot of the kids that I had known them because I took, summer camps and I went away to camp and ballet classes and everything else under the sun. And so, but it kind of prepared me in a way for that city life. Like I've always considered myself like just a city kid. Now New Orleans is also very city like, right? And so in a way, obviously, but I I think the biggest disconnect for me was when I moved to New York. And live in New York, you're granted, I got a good deal on my apartment. My apartment was cheap and it was owned by my landlord was a Greek lady. It had been in her family for like 60 years. The apartment building had like 4 units in it. And it was in Bay Ridge,
The genie,
Brooklyn.
the genie from Aladdin, right? When you moved and been like, here's your wish, and a cheap apartment.
Yeah, it was 1,700 a month. I had a roommate, so that was like 850 a piece. And I remember though,
I guess.
I there's no, because when you most time in New York, you don't live in a building with an elevator. That's like when you start making a little bit of money in your pocket and you can afford to live in a building with an elevator. And so I lived in a walk-up like building. So I was like, how do you get your furniture upstairs? How do you put your bed upstairs? How do you do all these things? And so it really took me having to kind of like when you're in New Orleans, you just, go into your local restaurant. You got a million friends or a million men in the tri state area that own a pickup or a Ford 250 that can, haul your stuff for you. You know what I mean? And like buy them some beverages and some food and like that's payment, right? And in New York, it was like, it's just me. It was just like, who do I, who's here to help me? Like, there is nobody. You have to get really strategic and really be able to be out of your comfort zone and be able to ask for help or like, figure out a way to, make stuff shake, and you get your couch upstairs. And lucky enough for me, I found a very nice person that, funny enough, that I actually went out on a date with, and he had a trolley in his SUV and was like, "Is this all your furniture out here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I really found a way to like get it up the stairs." And so he got the trolley and he like pushed all the furniture up my stairs. So with that being said, I found a glimpse of that hospitality in New York, but that was a huge culture shock for me because I just felt like, oh my God, I have no one here to help me. Like this is really, really, really hard.
And when you started working, in the finance world in New York, did you ever feel disrespected in any way being from the South?
No, honestly, like so I don't for context, like Rothschild and Co. is a European based like investment bank. So
Mm.
the
Yeah.
Europeans are like I mean they're people from Europe are
Mm.
great. Like and the British, I mean they're lovely.
Yeah.
I worked with a lot of Europeans, British, Irish. So I mean, hence that's my that's what helped me love the UK. I love the UK. I
Mm,
love spending time there.
yeah.
So I never felt that when I was at the CPA firm. When I
Mm,
first at the one I first worked at, I got kind of a taste of like the I'm a partner, I'm too busy for this kind of thing, and that was a interesting situation. But it wasn't, I mean, it was, it was typical, kind of New York, it's a New York thing. And so I, quickly was
mm,
like, okay, pay my dues, I'll find a place that's more, that kind of aligns more with what I'm looking for. And I landed at Rothschild and Co. Redburn, and it was an amazing group of people. And, I learned so much about, their cultures and who they were. So, yeah, I didn't really I'm fortunate, I will say that, like, I am very fortunate in the way that I've never had instances where I felt disrespected or talked down to. I have not experienced that, and I hope to never experience that. But for the people that have experienced that, autonomy, stand up for yourself, always maintain your professionalism, obviously, but, you don't have to accept that. You don't.
that that's such great advice, and I'm also so happy to hear that you get to know. I had met a couple of people when I lived in New York City from the South that, yeah, felt like they weren't just because of their accent or whatever, felt like people were just kind of, rolled their eyes at them at times. So that's what that curiosity was from. So it's really great to hear that you haven't experienced that personally. I guess I'd say though, before we get to the present and the current job search, is there any, and like I've, said it many times, and I really want viewers to know this. I reached out because I was so impressed by, your career path, and especially after role, what you were doing at the Commerce. But at the same time, what do you think has been the most painful part of your career so far? Is there anything that, like, you're like, that was not a pleasant 3 or 6 months? Anything that rings a bell there?
I think the most painful thing that I've ever probably experienced throughout my career is that I am a person that I become so dedicated to a cause or to my work that I will at times neglect myself. It's taken, years of, practice and having great mentors and, really utilizing, those tools to sort of, keep that from happening. And, and I'm thankful for that. But yeah, at some point in my career, that was a thing where I was pretty bad about. Like, I would become so dedicated to something that I would neglect myself. And, when you neglect yourself and you burn yourself out, you put yourself in a like a really weak position, and you can't do that to yourself. And if you have to troubleshoot and find different ways for that not to happen, do what you got to do, because you know y- no one everyone loves that you're passionate about it. But when you neglect yourself to the point of like you start, not that you could become unpassionate about the work, but like you're not as effective at that point because you're neglecting yourself so much. So I just like to keep that in mind. I think that is probably one of the most painful things that I've ever experienced. Just like, making sure that I hold myself in a very high regard. I look out for myself, and I still remain passionate about my work, and I still remain passionate about my team and, what I'm bringing, to the table. So
What what did it mean on a day by day, week by week basis? What was sort of the wake up call for you to realize this is not healthy for me?
I think just like cloudiness, not being able to think straight, irritability, binging coffee. It's like just not. I mean, I love coffee just as much as the next person. Like, the fact that I drink, no, I'd probably drink like a cup of coffee, and then I drink a tea, and then that's it for my caffeine intake for the day. I used to drink numerous cold brews. Like, I'm talking about, like, it used to be on tap, like IV. And like it was just not good for you. It's not good for your body, for your brain. You're trying to keep up, and you're trying to, stay on top of this, and and just be a team player. And it's like, everyone loves a team player, but you also got to love yourself. You got to take care of yourself. and I was fortunate enough that I had a boss before I moved to New York that was really big. Her name is Stacy. She was really big on that. And she used to always tell us that, her entire team. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely gotta stay on top of that, and I think that's really what that looked like for me, just crashing, tired, drinking too much coffee, irritability, it's like you can't think straight. It's like those are all like, "Okay, I need to reassess how I'm taking care of myself right now, and how good is my work really going to be if I'm in this state?" You know what I mean? So,
And that is something I've heard a lot from a lot of high performers that they really struggle to do that. For you specifically, do you sense what might have been behind that, where you kind of for a while forgot to take care of yourself? Do you have any idea what kind of led you to that point?
I don't know. I think honestly because I'm just like really passionate. Like I've always been one of those people that like when I'm passionate about something and I'm doing something, I'm a perfectionist. Like, it's going to be done right. It's going to be done, I want to make this amazing. I want it to be great. And it's like you can do those things without burning yourself out. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be so intense. And I have gotten really good at just taking a beat and being very cognizant of how I am spacing myself and how I'm prioritizing tasks and how I'm approaching work. And I like to think now that I approach work in a very healthy way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So, bringing it back to the present and the job search here now, what's interesting about the, job seekers I've tried to interact with, you have quite a few certainly are in that middle ground where they have like a part-time job in their career where they're looking for that full-time job. You have some people, uh, you know, certainly people there, also people who, like you, kind of are doing the consultancy, but also helping to get the full-time job. So you're someone, that it's early February 2026. Your time as a chamber in just in the passing off correct in January.
Hmm.
What um what do you envision this job search is going to be like for you, both on a day-to-day basis and in a broader arc? What do you think it's going to be like?
I mean, look, the reality is that the job market is a little weird. It's weird right now, right? If I'm being frank, I mean, it's an interesting time, and but what I think keeps me, or what is why I stay so optimistic, is because I know for me personally, I bring a very unique combination with my professional background, and I think other people should really kind of take a second with themselves and also reassess and think about their uniqueness and what they bring, and work with that and use that as a power strut. And because look, businesses still need people that are comfortable managing complex internal systems, external systems. They still need people that that are good leaders, and people that understand how decisions land externally. And, I think that right now, when you're hiring at director level, I think the biggest challenge isn't really capability when you're applying for jobs. I think it's just scarcity, timing, alignment. There are fewer roles, longer timelines, and hiring is being driven by trust rather than volume, probably.
What you talked at the start of that about it's a bit of a strange time for the job market. Is that something that you kind of were aware of before this current job search started, or has it been like much more of an eye opener since you've really been in the weeds of this job search?
No, I mean, I was aware of it before. I mean, look, it's definitely kind of built and it's gotten, I would say, worse in some ways. But I always tell people though, and I hate to sound overly optimistic, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And look, people and orgs still need people. Just because this is like a really weird time for the job market does not mean that people are not needed. It's not about capability. That's not the current challenge. It's scarcity, it's timing, right? So understand that, like, This has nothing to do with your capabilities, nothing to do with your expertise. And, just keep that open mind when you are applying and when you're interviewing. And take a beat sometimes. I mean, if you submit 5 applications a day and or 30 a day, and you need like just take a walk. Go, hang out with a friend. Go take a moment. I mean, sitting there at the computer for hours and refreshing your email for 6 hours a day isn't really going to speed up the process any longer, right? So, or any quicker. So, yeah.
How do you personally find the, willingness, to walk away when there's, I'd imagine, a party that sounds like you said the perfectionist. How do you fight the perfectionist urge of, I should always be doing more, more, more with this job search versus again the taking care of yourself that you referenced earlier.
Yeah, I think like that's when I have to kind of level with myself, right? And say, okay, you may be a perfectionist,
Mhm.
but understand that reality trumps perfection.
Mhm.
So, like, the reality is that you can do, and a lot of people consider the application and the interviewing a numbers game, and you can do. I just don't necessarily think that's going to necessarily change. I think, or they like change anything. I think that I have to tell myself and get like real with myself for a minute and be like, okay. You always feel like you could be doing more. And that's true. I always feel like I could be doing more of this, applying here, or doing that, or researching this. And like at the end of the day, like probably is that going to guarantee a certain outcome? Probably not. So, it's just those moments where you have to kinda check yourself, you know what I mean? And that's sort of where I'm at right now.
At your level, do you feel like it's more the filling out the applications that's likely going to get you that next great opportunity, or do you think it's more likely to come from a referral from someone in your network?
I think at my level at this point, it's a mix. It's definitely not just your application. It is a network. It is it is it's a 1 in 3. Like it's just yeah, it's nowhere yeah, definitely not like application based at this point for me. It's definitely a bundle of things that will probably spike your next or my next opportunity.
And you talked about the scarcity reality, the timing reality. As you look at kind of the opportunities that you're seeing out there, and again, director level roles, chief of staff roles, uh, is there anything that you kind of think that, companies should really be hiring for this more, but for some reason they're not? Like, is there a big blind spot that you're seeing in companies nowadays, especially at director level positions?
So it's funny because I do think that companies really focus on senior leadership roles a lot, which is not a bad thing because every company needs a form of senior leadership. But I wish sometimes companies invested more in that middle management. That's where a lot
Yeah,
of
and I've
people
heard
think that.
especially, it seems like a lot of companies are thinning out middle management in recent years, especially the advent of AI and whatnot. Why do you think it's important to invest more in middle management?
I think it's important to invest more in middle management because that's where the majority of your work is being done. I mean, you look at a beehive, right? Those are the worker bees. Not to say that senior leadership doesn't do any work because that's obviously not true, but there's a reason why senior leadership is meant to focus on high impact work and more executive level facing
Mhm.
work. And so if you are needing people in middle management to, do these roles and all these things that help support and help funnel up to senior leadership and help, hold up senior leadership, you have to invest in them. And that could mean multiple different
Mhm.
things. That could, mean, supporting your employees in terms of like how they're, given holidays, how they're, how you're
Right.
treating work from home or whatever the case may be, but really understand because, the problem is that you get all this turnover and a lot of companies will think, oh, well, we can just hire more young people and we'll just keep turning it over and turning it over, turning it over. And you notice all these people stay at the top, all these senior leaders, they never leave. But yet all the middle management just consistently turns over, you know?
Right.
And it's unfortunate. And, if you're serious about retaining great young talent and, or I'm sorry, fresh talent, not even just young, but fresh talent,
Mhm.
you will think twice about, not investing in that sort of middle management and providing those opportunities for growth and sustainability, right?
A few more questions. I'm going to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of
And I think this
course.
has been wonderful, hearing what, as someone that's had these director level roles at leading organizations, seeing your view come up there. And especially, I think a lot of people will be heartened to hear that you want companies to even invest in more in middle management. That's really encouraging. On a day-to-day basis, what has been the most, even early on the job search like you are, what's been the either messy, what's been the messiest part or the most frustrating part of the job search on a day-to-day basis? And how do you find the resiliency to not let that hold you back?
I think
How do you find the resiliency to stay optimistic?
like applications, right? Like it's like we're at this point in time where like submit a resume and a cover letter. Or also don't ask for cover letters for certain jobs, right? And not every job needs a cover letter.
Mhm.
Like, um,
Yeah.
and like don't have people have a resume and submit a resume and then ask them 20 questions on an application, right? That's the whole point of the cover letter if
Mhm.
you're asking for one in the resume.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
those are things where I'm just like, okay, like you come on, like we have to, as someone who has hired people and has interviewed, we have to do a better job at this. You know what I mean? Like, because when you go to an
Mhm.
application and you see 30 application questions, then you got to submit a resume, then you got to submit a CV, then you got to do a video. Like, it's all these things. And it's like, okay, like people are going to look at that and just close the computer.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate, and it's like, do you blame them for doing that? No, and
Mhm.
so I just and I think companies think by doing all of that, they're sort of making sure that that's their way of, like, weeding out and finding the right fit, but it's doing the complete opposite.
Mhm. Hmm.
You wanna know how you can find the right fit? When you bring
So,
them in
yeah.
for an interview and you have them interview with people that they're gonna be working with on a day-to-day basis. That's how you find out they're a right fit, not by
And
asking them for
following up on that, yeah, yeah. Following up on that, w- is there some sense that, you think managers might look at your resume, see your experience? What is something that might not be apparent on the resume, even if it's a wonderful resume, that you wish managers knew about you, and especially in terms of the value you can bring to an organization that might not be capable of telling in a resume?
Mm, I think I wish people knew. I think sometimes when you look at a resume and you just kind of see things for what they are on the paper and you're like, okay, great skills, smart, but I think I wish they knew I love to be a chameleon. I love to apply myself in different ways, and I love to learn, and I love to learn new things, and I love to learn new pieces of business. And I feel like when someone's truly serious about a mission and they're serious about being a part of something, they want to learn it all. They want to learn, not they have to
Mhm.
do it all, but I want to be I want to be cognizant. I want to be aware of how this comes together. And I think a lot of businesses or firms, there are people that are looking at your resumes, like or me specifically. I just wish people kind of knew that more about me because when you see someone like my resume, you're like, oh, okay, pretty straightforward, right? Like this is probably what they're going to want to do, and not thinking that like, well, I've had the opportunity to really play so many different hats in my roles within the roles
Mhm.
that I've had that I
Yeah.
just really would love to be a part of the team, and I would love to be this chameleon, and I would love to, just be a part of do great work. It doesn't necessarily always have to be so black and white. It doesn't always have to be so
Mhm.
this or nothing, right? And I just wish
Mhm.
people and hiring managers thought about that a bit more because I thought about that when I was hiring people.
Yeah. And a couple more questions. Thank you so much for your time. Do you ever feel like there have been times in your career when you just kind of sensed that a hiring manager didn't want to, even if you would have made an amazing fit to the company, they didn't want to see the spotlight by bringing you on?
Yeah, I don't I've never really framed it like that. I think that whatever their reasonings why for maybe why they didn't select me or why I wasn't selected is clearly because they just didn't see the fit, whether that be culture, whether that be in terms of skill or whatever it may be. I don't know. That's not really for me to like, theorize on.
Mhm.
I just sort of accept that answer and I'm like, "Okay, that we weren't a fit, that you weren't the place that I was supposed to go to. All right. So, where is now the place that I'm gonna go to?" And that's sort of how I approach that. So, I don't really have a good answer for that one because I guess I've just never really thought about it. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Do you, I guess, well then, has that something you've seen in organizations at least, where sometimes there's managers that don't want to let younger employees shine because they're worried about they might get,
Oh,
outshine
yeah, I mean,
themselves?
it happens all the time in business, right? I mean, it
Mhm.
happens across multiple
Yeah.
sectors. I've heard stories from friends where they've, encountered bosses and or, they're supported and they're celebrated until they get a little too good at their job and then they become a threat, an
Mm.
internal threat, right? And so I've had friends that have had those experiences and, it's always really tough, but again, that's where we go back to that conversation of autonomy and I'm not advocating people to just quit their jobs, obviously, willy nilly, but that's where you have to really think as a professional and you have to be like, okay, I have autonomy. I need to figure out what I'm going to do next if I am not feeling supported here and I am not feeling appreciated and I am not feeling like I am really doing anything, I'm not growing, right? Because growing is
Mm.
so it means so many different things. Growing does not always mean a promotion or a VP title or a MD title or, whatever. Growing is being given the opportunity to flourish and to do great things and to create things and to bring your ideas to the table. That's what real growth is, right? People can get
You think
promoted
like,
all the
yeah,
time and get a new
right.
title and still get stalled, you know what I mean? So,
Do you think compared to earlier in your career, titles now are less important to you and impact maybe the pace more?
I'm gonna be honest, I've always kinda hated titles. I
Why?
'Cause I
Why?
I feel like sometimes people really hone in on them, and look, don't get me wrong, I think people are very deserving of their titles depending on the line of work that they do. I just think
Mm.
that sometimes you find yourself so caught up in what you're being referenced as more so the work that you're putting out and you're producing. Because when you're working on like Wall Street, financial sector, in these banks, like unless you're like an MD, like like doesn't really matter. They got like 150 VPs. You know what I mean? Like, can you produce good work? That's what's important here.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I guess I've just always hated that. I've just never really been someone I'd be like, okay, whatever. Like,
Mhm.
am I employed? Can I do great things here? And for people that care about it, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with caring about your title. Some people, it's very well deserved. And if you care about those things, that's great. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. For me personally, I care about the work that I'm doing. I care about what I can do. I care about my limits. I care about my creativity, what I can put out, and why I'm showing up here every day. Not so much title.
That's a and that's a wonderful segue to my final question. This is my version of Final Jeopardy because I finish every podcast with the same question. And since everyone here has watched every single episode front to finish, you know what's coming. All it's you and it's two other really good candidates, and it's your dream job. What would be your closing sales pitch to the hired manager of why they should pick you over the other two?
Oh my god, you're making me do a sales pitch? um,
Sell me this pen. Sell me this pen. No, no, no.
well,
But I want to hear it. Why are you going to be the superstar of those three? The Hall of Famer, first ballot.
so I have had the pleasure of being able to operate within roles that have made me have, again, the opportunity then to really learn a business like the front and back of the hand, right?
Mhm.
I have
Yeah.
never strayed away from I've never stayed in one piece of the business or one bubble of the business, right?
Mm.
You can pretty much put me on a corner with a hot dog stand and guarantee you I've thought about enough about the hot dog stand, about what people I've seen, looked at people around me, observed them enough. Like I will figure out a way to sell hot dogs, a good amount of hot dogs, even though there's 20 other hot dogs, right? Like 20 other hot dog stands, in a 0.01 mile radius. I will figure out a way to sell those hot dogs, and I'm going to sell them well, and I'm going to sell a lot of those hot dogs. And I can do that because I understand the business in so many different aspects in so many different ways. And look, organizations, they need leaders who can translate strategy into execution and manage complexity and in a calm way, right? That does not disappear just because the market slows down. It actually becomes more important, and it's more of a required and sought out skill. So if you're wondering why you should pick me over these two other candidates, that's why. And there's that.
I'm sold. I'm sold. And I think Tay would know if you ever find yourself in Chicago and you put ketchup on your hot dog, you're done. Like I think. So, thank
Oh
you
no,
so
I
so
eat
much for
Polish dogs
joining
when I'm in
us. Is there
Chicago.
anything else? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. 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 Yeah, did you see the bear, by the way? Did you watch that?
Say that again.
The bear?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. What a wonderful show. Thank you so much for going on. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just really appreciate you having me on, Drew, and it's been such a pleasure, like talking and sharing my experiences. And I hope that whoever does watch this, they can take a few things away. And look, I'm always open to connecting with people and being that that person that you can talk to, ask questions to, regardless of who you are, right? Because that's how we help. That's how we grow people. And we help. We help. And so that's who I am.
Well, thank you so much for responding to my message so quickly. Thank you for coming on. Enjoy your birthday week. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Drew. Bye.